Peter Jukes came to prominence for journalism because of his involvement and commentary on the News International phone hacking scandal and the Leveson Inquiry. He live tweeted the long hacking trial, 500,000 words over 130 plus days from the Old Bailey. He also writes regularly for outlets such as The Independent, New Statesman, Prospect, Newsweek, Daily Beast, and many, many more on the topics of media, politics, corruption, and transparency. He's also the co-founder and executive editor of Byline Times. Through that and related projects, he emphasizes investigative journalism and its power, exposing power, corruption, and media malpractice. Peter, it's an absolute pleasure and an honor to have you on the channel today.
I'm honored to be here. Great work, Jonathan.
We're going to talk about, I think, a rather nefarious subject, but it's one that seems to be a rising tide of at least chaos and threat, and that is the ecosystem of partisan media, platform algorithms, and billionaire influence. Without getting ourselves into any lengthy court cases, what's your view on what is happening here? Because sometimes I sit back and feel that I'm living in some kind of strange dystopian, almost sort of Soviet dystopian novel. But what's your take on what's going on here?
Well, Jonathan, you are, but we have this respite. We're outside the dystopia. I remember I helped Carol Cadwell bring Chris Wylie, the famous Cambridge Analytica whistleblower. If you remember, Cambridge Analytica, formerly a military contractor, SCL, under the auspices of Steve Bannon, who we all know about, Trump's campaign manager, executive editor of Breitbart, with millions from Robert Mercer, the hedge fund owner, set up Cambridge Analytica in 2013. Interestingly, around the same time, Prigozhin's St. Petersburg troll farm was working, and there is evidence, photo data later crossed between them. But to go back to that, I remember Chris Wylie, about 6 months before it was ever public, describing to me what was happening. And basically, your data, all kind of marketing data, your Spotify playlists, everything that they had used previously in political targeting, had now been bundled together with 73 hacked Facebook profiles. And I was one of those hacked. It was an innocent app. Somebody, an associate of mine, This Is Your Digital Life, was paid a bit of money to take the survey, and they accessed all the data of all the friends of this person, including me, and even their private messages. And from that, suppress a few percent and encourage a few other percent to come out. And what Chris and Wylie and Cambridge Analytica did was basically harvest that data to target you with machine learning, targeted ads and news feeds to prompt you into where they want to go. They're basically, Chris described it as the fifth battle space after land, sea, earth and air virtual space. And that he's described many instances that basically information warfare, if you wanted to get an Iraqi Republican Guard general and kill him, one way they're doing that was surround his information space with false information. There's an American brigade stuck on a berm, and he goes, I'll get there. Actually, it's all fake, and then they zap him with a Reaper or a sniper. That's how the information space has evolved in warfare, and that was Chris's model. And they did that clearly to voters in the Trump campaign, and they did that, they dispute it, but their data was handled from LeavEU. And originally, before, because there was no money changing hands, originally they said, oh yeah, Cambridge Analytica worked on the Brexit campaign. We know that definitely Bannon was sent UKIP photo data. So what the analogy, and basically, what are they sucking from you? Not as in the movie with Keanu Reeves, electricity, that never quite worked for me anyway. They're sucking you data. The data you provide. The famous thing is, after 30 likes, Facebook knows you better than your friends. After 90, 80, more than your wife, and after about 150, it knows you better than you know yourself, because all those likes, there's places you visit, some of them are unconscious. There's a famous ad around about this time, wasn't a Facebook ad, where the advertising algorithm, the sort of data harvesting, realized a 16-year-old girl was pregnant before she did. That's how, if you have billions of points of data, and that's what Cambridge Analytica did. Now, thanks to Carol Cadwalder's work, it was shut down in 2018 in scandal. And what has happened since, I think you probably agree with me, Jonathan, that we're going to see it soon on TikTok, but on X, it has been Cambridge Analytica on stilts. Basically, we're living in a total information collapse. where whenever you interact, they are profiling you. They will target you with sort of ads, crypto ads, used to be porn ads, but also they're learning the mood, they're changing the mood. We know what Musk has done. He's deliberately changed the algorithm so he does better than Joe Biden, like after the Super Bowl in 2023, I think it was. We know he suppresses news from Ukraine. It's in the code. And we know that this system of blue ticks, I had one briefly, used to be a symbol of notability. Now they're a symbol of notoriety, because who buys a blue tick? Ali with Stephen Yaxley, Lemon, Eka, Tommy Robinson saying that, the government must fall, foreign insurrection, if you like. And so, yeah, the platforms, which supposed to be just platforms, were never neutral. YouTube, Google, Facebook, they tilt with the algorithm, they tilt the landscape. You think it's reality. And now I've got lots of anecdotal evidence of this, sort of people in there, especially boomers like me, they've got YouTube app on their television. They think it's like old school TV. And surely what these people say can't be lies. But as you and I know, a lot of it's complete misinformation. Some of it completely, deep fake generated. So this, in a way, Putin pioneered it. So did Cambridge Analytica. This complete disruption of the information space where there's any trusted reality. And they don't necessarily need you to agree with them. All they need you to use to withdraw, become cynical, not trust anyone, and then the authoritarians win.
And there's another interesting and highly pernicious thing. In the traditional world of political funding, it was easier to follow what was going into the system and to enforce the caps. With sort of crypto and digital investment, it means that there really is, on those who are of malicious intent, there's really no cap to the amount of money you can actually spend on, let's say, digital micro-targeting at crucial points of a campaign.
Well, this is a problem that the big tech barons like Zuckerberg and Musk, Zuckerberg particularly guilty of this. He would not turn over that information properly to the British Parliament. I'm not sure it's properly requested. And you're dead right. A lot of these populists, from Putin to Dugin to Trump to people like Musk, they always gone about control our Farage, control our borders, sovereignty. We can't have a super state telling us what to think. Yet, and this was happening, and it's recorded in the Electoral Commission, millions were pouring into conservative coffers from Russian oligarchs or from Soviet-born oligarchs from Ukraine. I mean, some had legitimate reasons. They had got golden visas here. There was some scrutiny of it, not enough. I mean, Elon Musk could still legitimately promise to put $80 million into support right-wing parties like Reform, but he could just set up a company here. And he can do that legitimately. It's absolutely absurd. But now we're in a darker world. Yeah, the world of crypto. Farage and Rupert Lowe's fallen out with Farage. They earn money on Twitter just by saying extraordinary things. Anything that goes viral, they'll earn money from it. We know back in the day, and I think this has ceased to be, but in 2016, there was a botnet, basically a lot of zombie computers, which could be targeted as fake eyeballs on a site like Breitbart, on a right-wing site, and then they would accumulate these advertising revenues of those fake eyeballs. That was one way of transferring cash to political actors. As you said, with crypto now, we saw it with the indictment, rather the warrant against somebody close to Putin and their social media agency, all the money they played through RT to American video influencers like Tim Pool. So, yeah, control of the media is high up on the agenda of any politician these days. They don't put tanks outside the television stations or rush into the radio station and dominate the airways. They twist covertly with money, incentives, but also by forms of algorithmic censorship, the messages they want, because that's the battle space. Winning hearts and minds. How's that done? And increasingly, that's done through social media, which is a completely unlevel playing field.
Бажаємо міцного здоров'я. Ми бійці батальйону безпілотних систем Black Raven 93-ї бригади Холодний Яр виконуємо бойове завдання на Константинівському напрямку в Донецькій області. Для їх успішного виконання наш підрозділ має потребу в пікапах для виїзду особового складу на позиції, евакуації, своєчасного підвозу боєприпасів, дронів та обладнання в район ведення бойових дій. Звертаємося до YouTube спільноти Silicon Curtain та Джонатана особисто з проханням допомогти підтримати збір, а також до Car for Ukraine та Бандера Мобіль з проханням допомогти з купівлею, підготовкою та доставкою авто на фронт. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
And we know that Russian warfare doctrine consists of multiple different layers, which are actually interlinked. They don't subdivide them into hybrid and gray zone and information in all the ways that we do. And I sometimes feel that we do that so that we don't have to take difficult decisions, to compartmentalize it. But certainly seeding narratives through assets and through platforms is a key way they do that. Now, without insinuating directly what Nigel's collections with Russia are, he has at various times echoed narratives that I say were very amenable to the Kremlin and could easily have been sourced from the Kremlin. And indeed, many of his close associates and friends have credible links with Russian agents, assets, diplomats, and so on. The sources of cash may be more difficult to track down. One of his close associates has just proved to be guilty or admitted his guilt in taking money for planting Russian narratives into the political European political system.
Yes, well, I mean, the fact that there are ideological alignments with Putin's agenda that stretches across the world, from the global south to the religious right in America, old tankies, there are some various, and it's a free world. You're allowed to say and believe whatever you want. I mean, I'd question you after the murderous invasion. In fact, the murdering began in 2014, but that's your right. What the problem is with politicians who are trying for high office. Let me be clear. When he thought he was going to leave British politics, and then suddenly 2024, oh, I'm coming back. I'm going to lead this new party, Reform, was it 22, 3? Anyway, and then I go, well, here's 5 questions no journalist has ever asked Nigel Farage about his Russian connections. I mean, the most egregious is he said, I'd never met the Russian ambassador. He goes to meet the Russian ambassador, Alexander Yakovenko, in 2013. There's the photograph of them. We now know Yakovenko was part of that concerted operation to get Britain to leave the EU prior to sort of fully taking over Ukraine. From then on, Nigel Farage is makes a regular appearance on Russia Today RT. In that first year alone, he makes less than 14 appearances, for which he's paid. We don't know how much. That same year, when questioned by GQ, what's the world leader he most admired, he said Putin. From then onwards, really, we see, particularly when his biggest backer gave £8 million to the Leave EU campaign, the biggest donation in British political history, Aaron Banks, throughout 2016, run up to Brexit. They're echoing the same points. Crimea's Russia, don't poke the bear. It's all the EU and NATO's fault.
NATO expansion, all the golden oldies, right?
And so does Nathan Gill. And we'll talk about him in more detail in a moment. Around that time, and Cadwell and I got the emails, undisclosed. He'd said he had one boozy lunch with some spook. Aaron Banks and Andy Wigmore, his second in command at Leave EU, had in and out of the embassy. I mean, when they finally came to court, the judge reckoned there maybe a dozen occasions, 15 to 16, they were in the Russian embassy. Along the things they discussed were gold and diamond deals. There's no proof they ever went ahead, and Banks denies taking any money. I'm not suggesting he did take money, but he talked about 8 gold and diamond deals. They shared confidential FBI documents. They talked about, harmonizing their messaging, and you can see that they would tweet each other, RT, Leave EU, even the Ministry of Foreign Affairs would get involved in sort of boosting these messages. So that is something Nigel should have been aware about before we get to Gill, because that's relating to 2 years later. Around the same time, he had an aide in the Strasbourg called Kevin Elul-Bonici. Elul-Bonici used to post their YouTubes and things like that. He was a husband of a friend of Nigel's from Malta, a sort of skeptic. He was caught putting Russian books and propaganda in EU cubbyholes of MEPs and then thrown out of Parliament. And then, according to The Guardian, was caught going in and out the Russian embassy in Brussels, planning a smear campaign. So these are two, maybe three, if you count both Wigmore and Banks. By the time this indictment comes up, this covers the period mainly from late 2018, 2019, you'd think Nigel would be a bit wary about all these Russian connections of his associates. But no. Nathan Gill, who has been described as someone the senior leadership don't know by Azir Yusuf, he's an unelected spokesman on efficiency for the Reform Party UK, and so one of tens of thousands of people that Nigel used to meet. No, he was one of his closest aides. An example of that is of all the 24 UKIP MEPs, remember Farage has had three parties. In 2014, it was UKIP, so swept the board, came into Strasbourg. Of those, only one survives the Reform Party. That's Nathan Gill. Nathan Gill, when the Reform Party is formed for a few months, is the only other senior leader apart from Farage. And I know, having spoken to several insiders, that during this period of this indictment, which is basically 2018 to about 2022, Gill was like the sub-lieutenant for Farage. If you want to ask Farage a question, you'd ask Gill. If you did something wrong or you appeared on something without approval, Gill would ring you up, or Tice, and then Tice would. So his key, the kind of key remainder from the original UKIP all the way to Reform. And he's there. He's there in those photographs of the Leave EU party on the night of the EU referendum in June 2016. He's there the next morning on College Green with the press, making the press, appearance along with Tice, Banks and Wigmore. So there is a very senior figure. Now, I'm also told that Farage used to micromanage budgets, especially foreign travel. So it is, I'm told, inconceivable that Farage wouldn't have known about Gill's frequent trips to separatist parts of Ukraine, separatist parts of Moldova. More importantly, and this is the most important thing, Jonathan, he then became, he basically hosted a roundtable meeting for Viktor Medvedchuk. I'm going to go tell you a bit more about Medvedchuk, which I'm sure you know, and maybe your audience.
Oh, he's quite a character, yes.
Quite a character. But the thing was, then he goes on the board of Viktor Medvedchuk's TV stations. This is in 2019. So he is associated. We can go to Voloshin and his wife Borodin in a moment. But basically, Voloshin, the guy named in the indictment, Oleg Voloshin, is the one who is offering him money, Christmas presents to do all these things. This period of about a year and a half is basically Medvedchuk's creature. He is in the same political party. Here's the middleman for Medvedchuk. His wife, who's photographed during this period with Gill and with Farage, Nadia Borodin, those two names she uses, is also, part of those TV networks. Why does Medvedchuk matter? Because on one hand, what I'm saying is during that period, this is before the Reform Party was fully ordained, in Strasbourg, basically Gill was Farage's closest ally among MPs. Now, in Ukraine, actually further afield, who was Putin's strongest ally in this period? A certain Viktor Medvedchuk. I mean, we know how close they are, because Putin is godfather to Medvedchuk's daughter. More than that, and this is the most telling thing about the value of Medvedchuk, he was, when Gill was working with him, already faced some treason charges. Then obviously the full war erupts in 2022. He goes on the run and faces even more treason charges, giving information to the Russian military, not just going against exfiltrating resources from Ukraine. He's captured, escaped, then captured again. And then when he's exchanged for Ukrainian prisoner swap later in 2022, guess how many prisoners he was exchanged for? How many Ukrainian prisoners were released in return for just one Viktor Medvedchuk?
There's quite a few. And my friend Sean Pinner, I believe, was involved in that very exchange as well.
Well, it's 215. And not just any prisoners. Sean was involved. So were the Avastol defenders, much hated by the Russians, their sterling defense of the Avastol steelworks and the siege around Mariupol, and members of the Azov Brigade. So these like the top value Ukrainian prisoners for one man. The only other comparable time was, I think the Germans exchanged an assassin of of Putin's for quite a large number of Ukrainian prisoners. You know the concept of krisha, roof protection. It's the Russian idea of kind of mafiosi. You always have a roof over you. Well, this is a proof that, this is Putin has to do this to keep these key people, because to keep pour encourager les autres, to keep the others on board. He'll always come and bail me out, even if I'm arrested, right? So the long and the short of it, so far, there may be more to come. Others are mentioned in this indictment for bribery, is we have at the time in Parliament, Farage's closest ally with, at the time in Ukraine, Putin's closest ally.
That's an extraordinary conjunction there, and the depth of that involvement, I have to admit, come to this, I wasn't aware of. I mean, that is absolutely extraordinary. And yet you don't see the full details of these stories being screened from the top of the tabloid headers here. I mean, this to me should be front page news, questions in Parliament, serious investigation, going back and uncovering details. Okay, well, if we know this about them now, what are the implications of what happened before? And yet, this is the bit where we seem to be living in some kind of freaky dystopia, in that the reality that we're covering, the reality we're trying to question daily, just does not seem to be the reality of a core part of the mainstream media.
So there were various reasons for that. Look, there's no accusation. By the way, there's no accusation Farage is involved in this bribery scheme or any other apart from Gill. But what did he know? Did he approve those meetings? If he's micromanaging things, these are legitimate questions for the guy who, in current polling, could well be the next Prime Minister of the UK. As for the media, there's two, we try at Byline Times, it's a classic New York Times phrase, print without fear or favor. I know what the fear is. The fear is these people are quite brutal, some of them. They're very litigious. They hauled Carol Cadwalder through the courts on a spurious judge's reading of what she said at a TED Talk, went on for 4 years. Didn't drag me through the courts, the Observer, where we published our story, interesting enough. So what they do, I'm not saying any of these particular individuals, but what their modus operandi would be, make you fear to tread in these paths. John Sweeney did some TV coverage, Channel 4, these Russian connections going back to 2016. They are complicated, not easy to tell. They involve peripheral characters. They involve knowing who Medvedchuk is, which, a lot of British journalists wouldn't. So it's the kind of analysis only people like you could bring, who could put the bigger picture together. So maybe there's laziness there, fear of litigation. And the last thing is favour. We know, because we've been banned 2 years in a row, 3 of our journalists this year from Reform UK conference, that if you ask these difficult questions of Farage or Tice or people, you get banned. And basically you don't get access. And so many political journalists rely on access. Oh, I've got a unique interview with Nigel Farage. I mean, where would Question Time be without Nigel Farage? He's a talented performer. I mean, what I've heard about him, he's not personally that nice, and quite distant and remote, but he's a fantastic performer. So a bit like the Trump phenomenon. Well, do you want to cut off? This is a good source of copy. These get clicks. I can get close to them, ask them the difficult questions, which they never do. It is, I mean, the stuff around Banks and Wigmore, nobody else really covered that. And the judge found in the libel case, they'd been up to a dozen times in the embassy, and they'd said maybe once. There is something going on there, and I think, the abject, ridiculous, ludicrous lying of Zia Yusuf. Oh, it's one of 100,000 people, 10,000 people, tens of thousands of people Nigel might meet every year. No, he was his closest aide. What are you talking about? He said he's always bigging him up, saying, I've known you for years, excellent guy, honest as the day is long. I mean, it's so much social media just completely turns that assertion on its head. So it's it's a combination of fear and favor. The media's been quite good, I think, on Ukraine in general. I don't think they've turned a blind eye to what's been going on there. But when it comes to British politicians, and also let's not forget, Evgeny Lebedev, son of a KGB agent in London, if there's ever such thing as a former KGB agent, owns The Independent and The Standard. Everybody's at these parties with him. So that element of sort of feeling compromised, feeling awkward, feeling you might embarrass friends, lose contact, I think that's the main factor. It's all part and parcel of the cozy cartel of the British press and media because they all know each other. They all go to the same spectator summer parties, often married to each other. And they decide a line. And the line was, you know, Angela Rayner may have misdeclared £10,000 for stamp duty, which is now paid, or moved 1.5 miles. Or just this sort of headline day in, day out about obviously something that was not good. This is Nigel Farage's closest aide, working with Putin's closest aide during the biggest conflict in Europe for 80 years. How many Ukrainians died last night through drone and glided missile attacks? This isn't just about, this isn't just about optics or party politics. And I've spoken to enough Brexit Party and UKIP members to know that though they're firm Brexiteers, they have no love of Russia. And the interesting thing was, so I'm just going to talk briefly about Voloshin. And so Voloshin is a Ukrainian pro-Russian MP, fled with his wife, Nadia, just before the invasion, maybe tipped off to Belarus, where they sort of maintain, still write for news outlets, basically decrying Zelensky and pushing for Ukraine to come back into Russia's orbit. So the day well, apart from this big round table launching Medvedev's peace plan, by the way, this is so important to Medvedev. He's there, peace plan. The next day he flies back to Moscow, meets Putin, and it's announced to the Kremlin, yes, peace plan, launched with some British MEPs or British and other MEPs. This is strategic stuff. Anyway, around that time, we think about December, there's a photograph of Gil with Voloshin's wife, Nadia Borodisas, right? He's at the press thing. This is something, and actually Medvedev took 2 TV stations out there. There's a live one and there's a recorded one too. That he's there on a mic talking about it. And she then, it's the same day, because she's wearing exactly the same clothes. He's done this plenary session talking about media freedom in Ukraine, is photographed with Farage. Now, she releases that. It's hidden on a Facebook post. So suddenly, 4 years later, last April, she decides to paste it on Facebook. So, I remember the times. Oh, you were so great, you and your team, Nigel, causing disruption in the EU Parliament, or in a good way, disruption from her point of view. Well, we've asked them all these questions. They will not reply. But it's the same day. Did he know her? Did he know Oleg Voloshin? Did he know that his top aide was being paid for them? Did he know, even if he didn't know being paid, he was going on the editorial board soon of Medvedev's company? What oversight does this have at a moment where we know that was the Kremlin's last play, basically under Surkov, to play the kind of non-linear warfare you talk about, little statelets, media news control, and this sort of non-linear warfare, which Surkov. It fails because basically Zelensky is not the stooge they think he would be. I'm pretty sure Surkov, it'd be good to know if you've got anybody who knows about this, thought Zelensky was a good idea. When Zelensky says "niet" to Putin, Surkov is fired. And that's the time in 2020 they decide that a military technical solution is the only way, and the special operation is planned. It might have happened in 2021, except for COVID. So what we have is, this is the last gambit of non-linear warfare. And let's put it, the Brexit Party, it's one of its lead chief MEPs was bang in the middle of it.
I'd love to know a bit more. I have the impression that Surkov did go out of favor, as you say, at that time, and the non-kinetic methods. 2014, spectacular success. Many people in Putin's circle tried to take the credit for that, although I think Surkov is certainly one of them. But all the chaos that's happening now, I wonder whether history will show that Surkov came out of retirement. Who knows? Because there's a lot of Surkovian stuff kind of going on. But we don't need to just reach conspiracy. I think there's plenty of conspiracy around there. What boggles my mind is the amount of airtime that Farage is given the amount that he had polled until recently. And actually, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, I guess. You give him more airtime and he becomes that thing. which he claims to be. But he does seem to be given a lot of it. Is it simply because some people want to make a career and ride on that for the clicks and the exposure? And as you say, he's a good performer and he's willing to perform when it's required of him.
I'd say, the British media loves insurrection and outsider. It loves causing problems. And the problem is those problems only come one way, increasingly from the right. Um, the Reform Party, I don't know how many MPs it changes. It's between four and five, depending who's left and who's just come in, like Danny Kruger. But it has like some fraction of what the Lib Dems have, who get hardly any coverage, about the same as the Green Party, who hardly get any coverage. I I mean, there's definitely people high up in the BBC. It's documented in books. He was, somebody, Robbie Gibbs. Robbie Gibb was Theresa May's press spokesman, but according to journalists there, Manveen Rana on Twitter, he stopped her doing stuff on Aaron Banks. He's in a book saying Aaron Banks rings, he doesn't like some coverage, he tones it down. I don't know what he ran the Westminster Millbank element. I don't know what their thinking is. I mean, there's a cultural cringe that goes on for the BBC, which basically goes, all we're very middle class, which they are, and they live quite metropolitan lives in London. Let's give the voice of the ordinary working people in Southend. And somehow this Dulwich educated former minerals trader is the man of the people. And there's a kind of workerism, if you like. Oh, that's, insulting, patronizing idea about what ordinary working people really like. And for the Brexit vote, of course, there are a lot of, what they call now red wall seats and, anywhere distant from power, post-industrialized, happens, in Poland, happens in France, in East Germany. There's a feeling the state isn't working for them and they are pressing this button, this right wing or the other, being pressed for them. We'll take on the blob. But, there's a lot of middle class people voted for Brexit. Probably the key votes were places like the home counties. So it baffles me that they have said, they've released Adam Bienkov, a statement, or he got a leak from one of their board meetings, that the BBC had to up Reform's presence on TV because they were high in the polls. But they've been they predominantly, Farage had almost a sitting seat on Question Time. Their coverage before that moment way exceeded the proportion of the polling. And as you say, the circular problem. Well, if he's polling well because the BBC have him on, which is what they've forgotten. The role of the BBC is to inform and educate and entertain. They're not there to reflect the passing fads of what the electorate are thinking at one moment. Why? Well, in that case, for about 40 years, they should have kept on banging on about capital punishment, which made people want it. It's the role is to inform and tell them not, is it raining outside? Let's have a vote whether it's raining outside. Let's go out and see if it's raining. I think there's a fundamental crisis both of money and morale in the BBC, and they're confusing objectivity with neutrality. You can't be neutral about the truth, but they aren't challenging these lies too much. And they're sort of positioning as a public broadcaster. Are they shaping public opinion? Are they informing it? It's a crisis which is particularly acute here because unlike America, which has quite a stable print system, we have a very right-wing press who are always on what the papers say, owned by non-dom billionaires who, have been known for years, except for maybe the Mirror and, the other objective one, the Independent's owned by a Russian oligarch. So if you have a dysfunctional BBC, which is leaning one way, with a press which is not leaning, is running full pelt the other way. The Telegraph supporting Farage and Musk, and looks like the Mail are going that way too. And Murdoch's got to support one of those two candidates. How can the public make an informed decision in an election?
And there's this other trend here, and I know we're reaching sort of end of the time we've got, but this right-wing alignment. There's these sort of dotted lines between Bannon and Farage potentially. There's dotted lines between Elon Musk as well. And even though recently Elon made some rather disparaging comments about Farage and his ability to win, there are these sort of curious alignment of, dare I say it, sort of interests between right-wing populists globally.
They're not dotted lines, so I think you're being far too generous. in 2012, I think, or 13, when they first met, Bannon and Farage. Steve Bannon had not set up Cambridge Analytica; they had taken over Breitbart. Um, and Farage was so impressed, he sent him a portrait of Bannon as Napoleon. He was always making these grandiose statements about history. He compared himself to de Gaulle at one point, if you read it. So, the connection between Bannon and Farage are undeniable. When he deleted it soon afterwards, but there was a picture of him after Brexit. Thanks, Bannon's. Thanks, um, Breitbart. We couldn't have done this without you. You helped immeasurably. We have documented them together. The whole Trump connection. The whole working of Farage on the Trump campaign. They are close as thick as thieves, to coin a phrase. Um, I think that our hope actually is there are different alignments in these right-wing forces. They're powered by tech. They're powered by kind of transnational global flows of money, by oligarchy in various forms, but they do have shades of difference. So, Elon Musk fell out with Bannon's different kind of cohort in this right-wing tech-fueled ecosystem because he wanted the visas for high-end skilled laborers coming to the US. And that's when Bannon said he should get deported. And when he mentioned Epstein in that famous tweet of Musk, when he says, Donald Trump is in the Epstein files, to threaten the contracts. He makes billions, SpaceX and Tesla, for government support. So there are different alignments. There's two versions of the Great Replacement Theory. I'm not, by the way, saying that these people particularly put this Great Replacement Theory. But one is, Muslims are being brought over to dilute the West, and it's a kind of jihadist thing. The other one is the Jews are putting Muslims to dilute the West. So within the shades of craziness, there are different shades of crazy. Let me put that, 50 shades of crazy. And we know also that Musk really likes Yaxi Lennon, thug, multi-convicted criminal, Irish citizen, and Farage keeps his distance, has fallen out with members of his own party over support for Tommy Robinson. It looks ideological. Some people, Maurice Glassman, the Labour Lord, is quite close to Farage, says he's going to stop Tommy Robinson. Other people tell me, feel free to put your own point of view, Nigel, anybody around him, is he's jealous a bit of Yaxi Lennon and worried that he could threaten him because Nigel doesn't really allow more primus. He wants to be more than primus inter pares. He wants to be primus around no other palace, no other rivals, though Titus is potentially one. So that's our hope, I think. It is a jumbled coalition of right-wing forces with different agendas. There's an anti-science agenda, which crosses over to COVID and climate change denial. But polling of reform voters shows that some of them would like to go back to the EU. They're supporting Farage on the sense of broken services and immigration. A lot support Ukraine. And even when we talked to Maurice Glassman a couple of weeks ago, who's all over. He's met Thiel, he's met Yarvin, Curtis Yarvin, the philosophy of the Dark Enlightenment. He's close to Bannon. He's mates with J.D. Vance. He says, well, I'm stalwart with Ukraine. So different horses for different courses. We don't actually have the same ideology, but when it comes to the biggest war in Europe for 80 years, when it comes to people dying on this front line day in, day out, I think there can be no equivocation. And right back to 2024, that moment that Nadia Borodin put out this tweet, "Oh, I miss you," Nigel suddenly popped up again, hadn't said it since the full-scale invasion, that the West had provoked Putin. We should watch out for this. I'm sure there's more to come in terms of the investigation. Sentencing is due in late November for Nathan Gill. We noticed the indictment says for conspiring with Oleg Voloshin and others. Maybe we'll find out who the others are. And maybe your great watchers, if they'd like to do a bit of internet sleuthing, could look up what Mevacek was doing in 2019, have a look at the parliamentary pictures, what Gill was doing, what Farage was doing, because, some things are hiding in plain sight.
And in all of this, we haven't really discussed a single policy. And that seems to be the Teflon quality of Farage, is you never dig down into what are they actually going to do in power. This is where I get fundamentally quite queasy because it seems that a sort of mini Trumpian deconstruction of the state, a kind of Doge process, is almost inevitable, a politicization of the military. I mean, good luck with that. I think they'll find it tougher here, even in the US, to get that one through. But almost certainly, it seems to me that Farage gets in, and anyone who's voting for him should be aware that he won't just come onto the stage and say, I love Putin again. I think he knows the optics of that are bad, but he may well deconstruct our support for Ukraine almost immediately and just do it behind the scenes. That seems to me a critical problem on the horizon because Britain's support for Ukraine is, well, many are aware of how substantial is it. Many are unaware of exactly how substantial it is.
I mean, and even Johnson, who had his moments saying exactly the same thing as Putin and Farage, and actually, what people tell me was delaying weapons supplies in the run up to the full scale invasion, with cabinet wanting to give more, but then had to turn on a dime and say, I support Zelensky like that. The moral clarity of it's so stark. Anybody not doing that would lose it. I just on the other policies, I mean, it's all a kind of bad tribute act to Trump. There's their own deloge because it's Department of Local Government Efficiency, or doles they call it. We've tracked on Byline Times, we have a thing called Reform Uncovered, where we go to what's happening to these councils they're control of. Catastrophe, disaster. People are dead, have been elected. They say they're going to save all this money. It turns out to be completely spurious figures plucked out of somebody's fundament. Meanwhile, the whole attitude to the health service, a sort of shibboleth, a sacred cow in British politics. Farage thinks it should be privatised, on the record many times as saying that. The most egregious policy, I think, was, and this is more in the Steve Miller, let's hate on the latest scapegoat ideology, is, people's settled status should be repatriated. That includes about 5 million people. We've done the calculation. That would be catastrophic for the British economy, the cost of it, the impact on the economy, let alone the morality of it, because settled status was granted. So, he looks at Trump. He's been an opportunist all his life, quite firm right-wing conservative beliefs. When he was a school kid, I know people at school with him, he would say anti-Semitic or racist things. I think he's smarter than that now. I think the policies are racist. I think the comments he's made about Jews and Muslims are racist, and Romanians. I think he uses those opportunistically because we know in a time of crisis that one thing, if you're a billionaire oligarch like Musk, or would be Trump, or would be Boris Johnson, or would be Nigel Farage, is get other people to hate each other, to sort of create factions and factionalism within society, get people fighting, pasting flags everywhere, riots everywhere, so they get on their most important business, which I think is where they sort of ideologically and materially align with Putin, is the serious business of making billions. That they think, I think they think that will insulate them from climate change, from any harms to come. They want to be dynasts. They don't like annextions. They think they're genetically born to the riches. That's where they get it. And we're in a dark period having to fight these people everywhere.
And it is, in some ways, a small silver lining that we have people like yourself, Byline Times, John Sweeney, and some of the other names you mentioned, Carol Codwaller and others. If only we had more, but it's good that we have at least some resistance to the rising tide of populist authoritarians. Peter, it's been a huge pleasure having you on. I hope to repeat the privilege at some point, and I'm sure those topics will present themselves that give us the excuse to do that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jonathan, so much.